This is Speaking of Shakespeare, a series of conversations about things Shakespearean, with a focus on new digital technologies and also about developments in Shakespeare performance and education across the globe. I'm Thomas Dabbs, recording this introduction from Aoyama Gakuen University in central Tokyo. The following conversation is with Kyoko Matsuyama, who teaches English language and literature at Komazawa University in Tokyo. Professor Matsuyama is a very active Shakespeare scholar and educator who has a specialized and a delightful knowledge of how Shakespeare is represented in popular culture in Japan. This conversation is made possible with the help of institutional support from Aoyama Gakuen University. This series is also funded by a generous grant from the Japan Society for the Promotion of Science called Kaken. And this organization, thankfully, includes support for research in the humanities. Hello, Kyoko. There you are. How are you?
I'm started living again because all the markings and all the things are over. So I could say I'm recuperating.
Well, we should explain to our listeners that we have just ended not only an academic semester, but an academic year, that we do start a new school year. We're in February now, and we do start a new school year in April. So at the same time that we are finishing one year, we're starting planning for the next year. And I wanted to ask you, before we get going on your research and background and talk a little bit about Shakespearean education, I wanted to ask you, as a personal interest, I don't remember a year in my career here at this university where I have worked so hard. Does it feel the same for you?
Yes, I think this is probably the first time in my teaching career that I had to put so much workload both to the students and to myself.
Yeah. And it's the psychological burden of having to teach online. And for people who may come to this video 5 years from now, we are still in this pandemic of 2020-21. And this is all new for us. And a lot was thrown on us, including a lot of stress about not knowing.
Yes.
And I feel a little better now than I did last year when we were starting. But if I had known how much was coming through my way, and I know that you have been super busy, and I think too that you have been given probably a lot of extra committee duties to do, because you have longer meetings, because people start discussing what do we do. And you don't seem to be a worrier to me, but I have colleagues who are super fine people, but they worry a lot.
Yes.
And then
yes.
they get me worried. It's sort of like
yes, that's so true.
What Shimpai Bio, worry sickness or something, it spreads just like a virus does. And but I think that we're looking at a period now where we'll have a little bit of a break where we can move off into other things that we like to do, although we do have entrance exams coming up. And do you have entrance exams?
Yes.
Coming soon, yeah.
Yes, my university already had one, and we have another one coming up.
And you have to sit to grade the examinations?
Yes. I already did, and I think I have to do another one again.
Yeah, that's stressful too.
Yes.
And it's long work. And for people in Japan, they understand this is routine, but in North American and European universities, I don't think it's normal for faculty to grade incoming undergraduate students, that they are accepted through other standards. But in Japan, you do, and for your university. And some cases in my past has been over 1,000.
Yes.
And you're at Komazawa Women's University. And I checked your location, and you're not far away from the Odakyu line.
Our university can have access from both the Odakyu line and the Keio line.
And the KO line, yeah.
Yes.
Well, this means a lot to people in Tokyo. Like when we were talking to people who are from Los Angeles, they'll talk about the 405 or the 10 or whatnot, and it's the phenomenon of living in Los Angeles, which freeway you're closest to, or the 101. And in Tokyo is train lines.
Yes.
And there is a joke that people will meet, young people will meet and wonder, maybe they do suit each other and might have a relationship, maybe get married, but they just don't live on the right line. They have incompatible train lines. And it could take an hour and a half or 2 hours, even in the greater Tokyo area, for them to see each other, right? So
Yes. Yes.
but I think that the reason I bring this up is that pre-pandemic, my wife and I used to go to Hakone a good bit, to Odawara on the Odakyu line on the romance car. So I have very pleasant memories, and I'm looking forward to a time when we can return to that.
Yes. Me too. Same with me, because I did get on the Shinkansen a lot to just hop onto anywhere I want to go, but now just going onto the local line and crossing the prefecture border, it's a bit of a problem. So I can understand.
That's right. There were some restrictions on that. I don't think they were heavily enforced, but you were not supposed to do it.
Yes.
And maybe there still are. Are there still?
I think the state of emergency is still going on, so we shouldn't cross the border too much.
So you're inside what's considered the greater Tokyo area, or
I'm in the suburban Tokyo area.
Suburban, yes. And so you're not supposed to go out. Is that right?
Yes, I shouldn't go to Kanagawa, or I shouldn't go to Saitama.
Or Saitama.
Those kind of things, yes.
And I live in the greater Tokyo area, and we've been under the same kind of restrictions. We are the, I don't know, kind of like the lepers of Japan, the people in the Tokyo area, because that's been the concentration of most of the infections, yeah. And so, yeah, there's more stress there. I want to ask, though, let's talk a little bit about education. I've been looking at your background a good bit, and you're very interested in Shakespearean education and education generally. And I should say, before we get into that, that I met you at the Gothic Literature Conference that was hosted by Samantha Landau at Tokyo University, 2019.
Yeah.
And what a great conference. What a great group of people.
That was a great conference. I look forward to it again, if she could do it again, or if someone else could think of organizing a similar kind of conference. That was a great conference.
Yeah. Well, she is talented in that regard, in many other regards. But she knows how to put on a good conference and organize it. And I loved being able to participate. And we were on the same panel. And when I met you, I said, this seems just like a very happy, kind of jolly, nice person. And you did a paper on Titus Andronicus. And I'm going, happy, nice people aren't usually drawn to that particular play, because for those of us in Shakespeare, that's one of the most violent and just bellowing throughout the speeches and so forth. And you were showing in anime that drew from Titus Andronicus, and one scene in particular where there's this very violent, would you call it a murder, assassination, or just obliteration of a cartoon character? But I remember jumping, it was so striking what they did in that anime, and how they adapted Titus for a different type of narrative. And I just thought that was brilliant work. I thank you again for that paper. I've never thought of Titus the same way since then. But we're going to come back to Titus and to Tempest and some other things here. But with the, I wanted to ask right off the bat, what was the largest challenge of teaching in your field this past year?
Um, not being able to see the students' reaction was probably the biggest thing, because my university didn't encourage students to keep their cameras on, which I can understand because cameras can show quite a lot, and sometimes students feel uncomfortable showing their background or whatever that says too much about their family or their financial background or their condition. And if that's comfortable for the students, I think that was good. But also to us, not being able to see the students' reaction was a bit stressful because, as you know, like most of the time, we look at students' faces and the atmosphere that they have, then go on or give a little more detailed explanation or change the wording or change the topic or change the view of the explanation so that the students can have that look of saying, okay, I understand now, or okay, got that, so could you go on? And those kind of facial expressions, those kind of things are quite important. But with the camera off, you are literally speaking to a blank screen with just a student's name in dots. So that was a bit stressful. And also, sometimes I had to pre-record my lecture, and that was also stressful because you have to do it in the middle of the night.
Yes, I in fact noticed an email from you that came in well after my bedtime. You are a night owl. You like to work into the late night, and there was a period of my life when I was younger that I did too. And now I'm pretty much done at about 10 o'clock at night. So if I want to work, I have to get up early. But it is stressful to do these pre-recordings. And I found I did a few this year for a part-time class that I taught. And I found that more stressful than meeting them simultaneously online. Because at least when you're meeting them, you do feel that there's someone there, there's someone out there. And instead of, look in this Zoom recording, looking at yourself talking about a literary work or whatnot, that was hard to get used to. Are you guys going to change in April? Are you going to have, say, a hybrid classroom, or at our place, the key word has become high flex, and we're not quite sure exactly what that means yet. But they really would like us to get into classroom, although not require all students to come to class. So that's a new challenge.
Currently, our university is saying they're planning to do a face-to-face class as much as possible. But with the changing condition, I think they might be looking into a combination of face-to-face class and an on-demand class.
Yeah. I'm hoping that if I see you at a conference or whatever a year from now, that this will all be a distant memory. That
we really hope so. And I think for the students' sake, like not being able to interact with just to talk, just to have a chat, that you shouldn't do in class, but those kind of things are very important to the students too.
Yeah. Well, we've discussed this too, whether there were some professors, some of our part-timers were for what we call IE classes, integrated English. They use groups, and they depend quite a lot on interaction of students. And I think a few of those professors may have required students to turn on their videos. And there were some student complaints, not bitter complaints, but there were some students who said, we really prefer not to show where we live and that sort of thing. And they live in small places and have their mothers are passing through in the background trying to get everything, or fathers or whoever's in their family. So I didn't. And I was fortunate. I had what's called a zimi in Japan, but a seminar class. And they came on after about 2 or 3 weeks. Everyone came on because it was only 12 people. So they lost their inhibition. and that worked out so much better. And in fact, sometimes the class went a little bit overtime because I could sense with them and with me that we just wanted to talk with people, you know, just find out about each other and that sort of thing. But I see where that's something. Did you learn anything in doing this that you didn't know about before that might improve your teaching or improve your research even? Or did you feel that anything good came out of this in terms of your learning how to teach maybe better?
Like, preparation is everything, is I think that I learned the most, that you need to have the information that you tell the students, and also using the iPad much better would be another thing, because if you want to show something that's important, if you were in my previous condition, you had to go on to a particular machine to show that part, but sometimes that doesn't work very well. But if you have a tablet, and if you could just click it and switch it into your tablet and highlight the parts that you want to the students to see or read, or to have an emphasis, I think those kind of techniques are good. And also asking students to hand in a question that they have is also important. I did used to collect students' information or any kind of questions, but I wasn't able to put that into use very well. But with my university used the G Suite, the Google Classroom system, and that made it very easy for me to collect questions and then put that into another slide and answer those questions.
Yeah, I found Google Classrooms to be wonderful. That's not a university-wide thing for us, but several of us have been able to use it, and we've been very happy with that. And the students said, we took a survey, and we had a WebEx video conferencing, and we used I think a dated LMS, learning management series, learning management, whatever, called Course Power, and which requires a lot of downloading. And they didn't like that. They liked Zoom and they liked Google Classroom. We didn't use Google Meet. Did you use Google Meet?
We had to use Google Meet. We were not allowed to use Zoom or anything else.
Yeah.
Google Meet was the standard, and that's the only thing that we were allowed to do.
Yeah.
Some of the students did complain that because our university did everything on the Google Classroom system, the students were saying that they get too many notifications. Like, your deadline for this one is now 1-on-1, and it's going to be due in a week or in a half an hour. Those kind of notifications just drove them crazy.
Yeah, yeah. And it worked the other way too. I got a lot of emails from students, particularly at the beginning, who, we were just having trouble getting set up, and there were some anxiety on their end. But now you have done some articles about teaching Shakespeare in Japan. So I want to get a little more specific about your views on teaching Shakespeare. And this, of course, is literature too, for any of our colleagues who teach what we call a kiso enshu, like an introduction to our field. I used to teach one, and I would not teach. I teach a couple of sonnets maybe, but I would go to what we'd call canonized books like The Great Gatsby, or particularly anything that I had, they could get a film version of from a recent film. And you did an article on reading Twelfth Night in modern form. How does that go? Is it better than trying to read Twelfth Night in the Shakespearean language?
Even in the modern Japanese form, it's long, and you have to use your imagination quite a lot if you're not used to reading plays. But when reading a novelized version and a very adapted version, which sometimes makes it easier for some students to start reading or get in touch with reading those kind of materials. That's I think the aim of using those kind of adapted or novelized forms as an introduction into peeking into the world of Shakespeare or peeking into any kind of literary works.
Yeah.
And I actually haven't taught Twelfth Night. My teaching in Shakespeare is very limited right now, but I'm using those kind of books to show them that these used to be considered as a very easy access entertainment.
Mm-hmm.
And entertainment is something fun,
Mm-hmm.
but also there are some entertainments that you don't like, which you really don't have to like them. You just have to know that it's there. It's just not to your liking.
I tried to teach the Shakespearean version of Twelfth Night maybe 2 or 3 times, and I felt like I had limited success, some success, because the general gender bending that goes on in there, and the students catch that, and they can, of course, use a Japanese translation, and then we try to enter into the Shakespearean language, and there's a pretty good film version of that that they have access to, and yet the humor, what the Sir Toby Belch and Andrew Aguchi, those humorous exchanges, which I think are fabulous entertainment. And it's very, very difficult to explain what the jokes are internally to those speeches. And of course, Feste has its philosophical reflections that are not easy to get across. And I wondered about the modern edition. Do you feel that they are capturing at least some of Feste or some of the humor?
Actually, the concept of the fool, like the Feste, is very difficult to explain in Japan because we didn't have those kind of people. I think they had a similar version, but not as active as that. Maybe that's because the novelized version that I used downplayed Feste very much, and so did Sir Andrew. He was just a comic character there, but also I think having 2 plot lines or 3 plot lines going on at the same time also confuses some people. And I think that's one of the reasons the novelized version only concentrated on the relationship between Orsino, Cesario, Viola, and Olivia.
Yeah. Well, like you say, it can be a portal into into deeper study. And so I was interested in that. And I'm also interested in your reflections on teaching unfamiliar material with familiar resources. Now, tell us a little bit more about that.
Unfamiliar material is what I'm teaching, like the English literature or the literature in a different language, in a different cultural background. And with the familiar material is like the manga or the animation or the novels, and novels as in the light novels, like in Japan it's called the light novel, but I think the basic concept was for the juvenile, the young adult novels that's easy to read, that kind of thing, easy access to some people. And some people think that being able to read those things is something quite familiar. So that's why I use those as an entrance or introduction.
Yeah, I like that. And that's what I thought you were talking about. The way if you say generally the West, we go to Shakespeare and then we see something in a movie or popular culture and go, that came from Hamlet, or but this is the reverse. This is starting out with popular culture and moving back the other direction using young adult novels. And I am very happy to hear this, because when I was in middle school and high school, we were given some very, very difficult literary novels to consider. And I think what happens is, I was in an advanced placement class. We're supposed to be college bound. So in Japan, it'd be 3rd year high school. Teachers would see, well, what are they teaching in college? and pull that book down. And then the second year high school would pull the book from the third year, trying to move, thinking that this is advancing students more. And we ended up with these, James Joyce's Dubliners, which is, it's wonderful. But and these incredibly difficult plays. And we did King Lear, which was very difficult for us. Instead of, there was one teacher who brought in, I think it's John Knowles, a book called A Separate Piece. And I read it cover to cover and loved it. And if I'd had more of those books to read, I could have advanced to people who are doing more sophisticated things with literary conventions. And Shakespeare, I think, more fluidly. It could have worked better that way, but they hit us with the very, very, very hard to read stuff. I think in 8th grade, we had to read George Eliot's Silas Marner. And that didn't go over. So I love the idea that you're using what the young adult fiction in the Twilight series in the West, and Harry Potter, of course, famously. We learned, I think, in the 90s and later, that if you want to get young people to read, give them something that they like, and you will develop among many people a habit of reading and learning and so forth. So that's great on your regard. So the young adult, is Twilight popular in Japan?
It wasn't as popular as the US or the UK, but the concept of vampire has been something of interest to the students from I think the middle of the 90s to the beginning of the 2000s. I think there are quite a few animations or mangas that dealt with those kind of themes, like the vampires and the werewolves and those kind of things.
Yeah, a lot of fun, and for them and for us. My daughter, I only know through my daughter's 30 years old now, but I would keep up with books, and it changes from very quickly, from not even generation to generation. There may be one series that's popular for about 3 years, and then another one comes in. For her, it was Kato Kato Chaimu, and she read the whole series. And what I noticed and what she pointed out to me is that if you're in middle school first year, they will incorporate the kanji that you're supposed to use that year, but not further along. So you're learning your kanji as you're reading your manga. So I just think that's a wonderful approach. Now, I am also fascinated with your background. I'm aiming to get to a guy named Edmund Kean. And you and I share an enormous love and interest of that period in theater history. But let's go to you first. You graduated high school in Canada.
Yes.
And how long were you in Canada?
I was in Canada for 4 years. So I went into Canada at grade 9, and then graduated high school at grade 12. So 4 years at a local English-speaking school, a public school.
In terms of adapting to Canada, did you find it horrifying at first to be that age and suddenly be thrown in with a bunch of native-speaking English Canadians? Canadians tend to be famously nice people, but they are not always nice. They're people after all. So, maybe 1 in 1,000 is not so nice. Did you find that that you adjusted to the social element of your school?
Actually, Canada was the second place that I lived abroad. I lived in Australia for 4 years when I was in kindergarten and elementary school. But I was at a Japanese, all-day Japanese school. So, but still, I was able to retain the listening ability that I had. That worked well when I went to Canada, that I was able to hear what people were saying. But when it comes to having contact with other students. I think it was a bit of a different story because I was in an ESL class, the English as a Second Language class. So I probably had the longest contact with those kind of students at the very beginning when I went into grade 9. So we had a similar background. Some people came from Taiwan. I think some came from Hong Kong because it was before the return of the Hong Kong to China. Also, I think I had some students who came from Afghanistan, Nicaragua, Brazil. So we had so many different backgrounds. So we didn't care too much about whether we were able to integrate into the society at that point.
Where were you in Canada again? What town?
I was in Alberta, Calgary.
Oh, okay, so that's sort of the middle and sort of like the American West. So you're not in a cosmopolitan city like Montreal or Toronto, Vancouver, for instance. You're more in a smaller Western area.
Actually, Calgary, because they had a huge natural gas and oil, it was a bit cosmopolitan in that sense. We had many people, and also we had a very large Asian community, especially the Chinatown was big. So I wouldn't say it was as cosmopolitan as Vancouver, but we had that similar air.
Okay, so you were not in a small town atmosphere. You were in a big city, and you had.
Yes.
Now, what happened though when you went to I don't know about Australia, but when you went to Canada, instead of being a Japanese national, you suddenly are Asian, and you use that word yourself. You're grouped into the Asian community very often for good intentions, reasons. Okay, these people are in a minority situation, and we have to make sure that we have the resources and that we're sensitive to their adaptations and so forth. But I'm certain that you identified as Japanese, certainly not as Hong Kong based or Taiwanese or Korean. And then when you get to the States, you can be kind of grouped together. In their, I'm not the States, the Canada, North America, in their way of thinking.
When I started living in Canada, I always identified myself as Japanese. And when people asked, "Are you Chinese?" and I would always say, "No, I'm Japanese." But then when you start to go to school, or actually when you actually come back from Canada, that's kind of things start to change. And also, when I start going to obviously conferences or those kind of things, I think that's also another turning point that changed my notion that when people look at me from outside, yes, I think I'm going to be categorized into that Asian huge category. And I think to assume that I'm in that category and think that, are you from which is your background, and asking those kind of questions has both good intentions, and sometimes I think it's not maybe not a correct way to say it, but just to look down at some people. I think that kind of thing happens a lot.
Oh, I'm certain it does. I'm certain it does. Not everyone, and
yeah.
I get it. Not so much in Tokyo, but I've had a much smaller experience. But being a foreign national in Japan, I felt it more when I lived in Hiroshima, where there's so many people, the vast majority of people were wonderful, nice. I have a nostalgic feeling about Hiroshima, but they were not used to seeing foreign nationals. And the children in particular would very often react. And it was the mothers who would scold their children a bit and say, "Don't do that, don't point at this person," and then apologize to me. That was a little more irritating maybe than the child just saying, "Look at that," and it would be what, gaijin da. I thought that was kind of cute. And then the mother would be embarrassed, you see. So so to a smaller degree, rarely in Tokyo do I get anything like that. But I do know the feeling where you're grouped into, I'm not Tom from South Carolina in America, I'm a foreign national. And then the next question is, of course, where are you from? And after you're here for a certain number of years, you want to say, Tokyo. I mean, that's where I've lived for years, but that's not, and I understand that too. It is a curiosity that people have. And so no one individual is trying to hurt your feelings or do that.
Yeah.
But collectively, when the question comes over and over, who are you? Where are you from? It almost creates the feeling like you don't belong, right, where you are. And why shouldn't you, right? Did you ever receive Canadian citizenship?
No, because my father was going to be there for a very short period. I don't know whether 4 years is a short period or not, but
yeah.
We were there just for his job, and we weren't into getting a citizenship.
Yeah.
And in Japan, you cannot have a dual citizenship.
Oh, that's right. I forgot about that. I probably shouldn't even ask the question. Yeah, you have to choose at the age of 20 or 21, I think. If you,
yes,
yeah.
I've never had any citizenship other than Japanese, but as you said, children could be cruel.
Yeah.
When I was in elementary school in Japan, I came back from Australia.
Yeah.
Can you guess what the students started to say? Even though I have a Japanese nationality, a Japanese citizenship, they always pointed me as an Australian.
The Japanese
because I was
children,
never born and bred purely in Japan.
That's it. Kyoko, I hear this over and over. Every year we have returnees who we interview, and they're very selective, and they are typically very, very good. And of course, their English skills are very advanced, but I mean, their thinking skills are very good too, because they're children of education parents, and they've had a lot of experience, and like you did. And so we want them. These are great students. And I ask them this question every year. How did you adapt when you left, and then what about coming back? And invariably they say returning was the hardest part.
But still, even when I entered college, it was still the same, because you had to tell, or when you do a self-introduction, which high school did you graduated from? And there you go. I had to spill the beans there. And they just give me that look saying, okay, you're not pure Japanese. Like, what do you mean pure? Those kind of things do happen.
I'm trying to think of their cultural comparisons. I do know of a political candidate, and I said before, I'm from the American South, which more Inaka, my background, and South Carolina is a smaller state with some very wonderful things, but then some other things that aren't so wonderful, like anywhere else. But when I was growing up, there was a very strong North-South feeling still. And I remember a political candidate who was exquisitely well qualified running for governor. And he had done his undergraduate at Harvard in Massachusetts, and I think a master's degree after that, and had come back and worked as an attorney. But 15 years later, his opponents saying, listen, he's one of them. He's not from around here. He's one of those Yankees, right? And it had some traction in the political campaign. There was this kind of lack of trust. And it is just ridiculous. It really is a ridiculous thing that people think that way. And you see, that's something I don't have to be part of. I don't have to feel like I'm not Japanese. I know I'm not Japanese. And I don't feel a sense of being somehow minimalized in some way because of that. Now, has that feeling kind of receded as you've continued your career? You finished, you went to Waseda, and for our viewers, that's an elite university, and one of my personal favorites. Frankly, because my wife, she has family who graduated Waseda, and she knows the Waseda song. And she loves the she loves the Waseda spirit. But you did undergraduate there, and you went all through to your PhD level at
Yes,
Waseda.
yes.
And so, at some point, did you feel like you belonged to fully to, of course, to the Waseda community, but did that recede, or is it still going on now?
It's still there because when I start speaking, they notice that that doesn't sound like a purely Japanese educated person speaking. It's the problem of just the muscle around here, but still, they say, okay, where are you from? And how were you educated?
The Japanese word is kibishi. It's just too it's just too strict, because we all know there's a Hokkaido dialect that's far different from Tokyo dialect. Kyushu is far different from both. There's famously Hiroshima dialect,
Yes.
and the dake is jaken, and people have learned essentially Tokyo dialect in Japanese schools, so they kind of are, if not bilingual, bi-dialect, and would be careful not to speak too much in their, say, Kansai dialect if they're trying to be successful business people in Tokyo, and maybe the reverse, I'm not sure. But how would you know, how would you be able to tell that your accent is ever slightly not Tokyo accent or whatever?
One thing is that sometimes my Japanese accent is a mishmash of West and the East. Because when I was in the Japanese school, we had students from everywhere, students from Osaka, Tokyo, Hokkaido, Tohoku, every kind of students who brought in their own dialect. Another thing that they would say is that when I speak English, they notice that my accent, and another thing that they say is the fluency. That's not Japanese educated product. That's what I think they can notice.
Yeah, and I have sensed that, and I can't go into specifics because it's very close to where I work and live, but there's a problem when your English is too good or sounds too native, and people can pick that up without maybe a kind of accent that would be a standard Japanese learner of English. And I can, of course, hear that too, and very pleased to hear that. But yeah, I can see how that would be the case. Now, we're talking about language, and at some point you started studying Shakespeare. Now, are we going back to Canada, or when was the turning point in your career where you decided, I want to study this literary stuff and maybe Shakespeare? Was it always there, or was it kind of revelation in school, a class or teacher or something like that?
It was actually at my high school in Canada. We had to study 3 Shakespeare plays in 3 years. We had to read Romeo and Juliet, Macbeth, and King Lear.
King Lear.
Yes. But somehow interesting enough, Romeo and Juliet, I already read it in the novelized version. I think it's the translation of Charles Lamb's Failed.
Tales from Shakespeare.
Yeah.
And so you read that version rather than the Shakespearean version in high school?
Actually, I read that version when I was probably in elementary school or something in Japanese.
Oh, okay. And then you went
then I read the actual English version, or the Shakespearean language version, in grade 10. In grade 11, we had to read the Shakespearean English version of Macbeth, and the same with King Lear. But what made me thinking about going in and studying Shakespeare was actually King Lear. It was probably one of the hardest plays to read. It's long, and it's very difficult to imagine what kind of condition people are in, because you're a teenager. You cannot imagine how people in their 70s or 80s feel. But still, the teacher who taught us that King Lear, was able to break that down into the psychological side of how people feel or react. And interesting enough, it was probably one of the hardest things that I had to read, but that also interested me. That how can people create such a thing, and how people's imagination could go on, and analyzing those kind of things was at that point quite interesting to me. And also at grade 12, I know I had to return to Japan, and I know I had to choose something to study because going to university was something very automatic in my family. So I was wondering what I want to study. And then, okay, so Shakespeare is interesting. And I know that when it comes to studying in Japan, my 3 years in Canada had some effect. So I probably won't be able to study early modern Japanese literature or even like the 10th century Japanese literature because I haven't been educated in that. But if it's English, maybe I could use my background well. And also I thought Shakespeare was fun at that time. So that's why I chose English literature as my major and Shakespeare as my interest.
So you had the exquisite, for what you wanted in your life and your career, you had the exquisite experience of going to a school where Shakespeare was taught as a literature on the high school level, and you would not have had that experience if you had been in a Japanese school.
Yes.
I'm learning from my colleague Igarashi Sensei and from other my students that you would get a world history class where you would learn the name Shakespeare, you would maybe learn the name Romeo and Juliet, but literary study, as you understand it in a Canadian or American or British or German school, does not happen because of the focus on practical language, learning practical language and getting prepared for, to become part of the Japan corporate structure in a certain company or whatnot. And so you had that advantage when you went to Waseda. Yeah. Did you have teachers along the way that convinced you that you would like to continue going to graduate school? That's a big decision.
My third year seminar teacher was told me that, are you interested in coming to graduate school? Interesting enough, although he wasn't a Shakespearean teacher, his major is in John Keats, so he teaches poetry.
Yeah.
And I loved his class, and that's why I chose his seminar for third year.
What was his name?
Kiyoshi Nishiyama.
Yes, okay. Excellent. John Keats. I think that if I had to choose number 2 to Shakespeare, it would have been poetics, and beginning with perhaps the romantics, and certainly John Keats.
Yes.
And so what a wonderful experience to have a fine professor. And so you decided to continue on and move into more specialized study of Shakespeare as you went to your master's, of course. And somewhere along the way, you got into theater history. You got an interest in, and I guess you felt like at some point you were very competent in the primary sources of Shakespeare, and you became interested in theater and what adaptations, later adaptations, and me too. I've done research and work on that. And when I saw in your background your interest in Edmund Kean, I said, "Yay! We are of the same family in that regard." I found when I first ran across Kean some biographies, I think a couple of them were spurious, not reliable, but just if any of it were true, he's one of the most interesting Shakespearean characters, long after Shakespeare, of course, in the early 19th century, out there in the whole history of a lot of interesting Shakespearean people. It's Edmund Kean, and you have focused on a good bit of your research on Kean. Now, what drew you to Kean?
I started doing the theater history in my master's paper. my supervisor then said, why don't you write a chapter about the theater history? And at that time, my master's paper was on Midsummer Night's Dream, and I had to go on and start doing that kind of writing that kind of chapter. And very kindly, my professor suggested that in September, and I had to hand in my master's paper in January. But interesting enough, that material was quite fascinating, especially with Midsummer Night's Dream. The description of the fairies tend to be very interesting. It could start with a ballet dancer and then turn into some kind of creature with feathers and so on. The reason I started doing Edmund Kean was when I went to my PhD level, I at last got into the professor who drove me, or actually drew me into the graduate school system. And as I said, he was a romantic poet, scholar. And his seminar was basically romantics. And then I realized that I cannot switch to romantic poets. Shakespeare was there and it had that grip on me. It wouldn't let go. Then I started looking into materials that could fit in with both the romantics and the Shakespearean. Then I started going into looking at theatre critics, and that's when I met John Philip Kemble and Edmund Kean. And Edmund Kean was, as you know, the favorite of the romantics, especially Hazlitt. So although Hazlitt criticized Edmund Kean quite heavily, but still he was a fan of Kean in that sense.
Yeah.
That's why I started looking into Edmund Kean.
We might, if we saw him now, if he were living now, accuse him of overacting.
Yes.
That's a Japanese word too, is overacting. And because he did the melodramatic and really histrionic, according to what I've read, but he was captivating when he got it right, and drew audience where he was at Drury Lane. And that theater, I think, was about to fail when they brought him on for roles, and he was part of their revival at that time. And I think I'm right in saying that.
Yes.
But he was excessive also in his love interest, and was falling out with the father of whatever the woman he was, I don't know. And he made it to America and did.
Yes.
So he was an international figure, and America's a lot further away in the early 19th century than it is now. But you go in kind of a lineage there from Kean to Kemble, and Kean and Kemble are dealing with, in the 19th century, an extremely popular Shakespearean play,
yes.
Not an academic, iconic, high cultural subject. This was the gritty stuff. This is the rock concert. This is where everything's happening. And I know in American theaters, I'm a little better with American theaters, but those theaters had to be policed. They had to put officers, the peace officers, in there because of the potential of fighting and breaking out, and it kind of culminated famously by mid-century with the Astor Place riots in New York, which had to do with a sense of competition between whether we're going to have an American actor play Macbeth or a British actor, both very famous. And I won't go into that. That's another subject. But the popularity of the Shakespearean theater, and how nobody understood this yet as this academic subject. And I think that's what took you into anime and manga, and really more recently, the notion of how in Japan we probably are away from the mandate to treat Shakespeare as a great cultural Western icon. We can, and you and I are working a little bit on this right now, we can play around with it. We can kind of go back to this period of the Kean and Kemble and raucous stage where, no telling how this guy played Macbeth. It might have looked ridiculous to us, but you have run across all of this material. And in fact, you're considered sort of the resident expert. I know that from, yes, I've been talking around. It's, well, no, you have to talk to Matsuyama Sensei about this because she knows more about this than I do. But you sent me a good bit of information, and in manga and comic, we talked about the Titus Andronicus. There's this other one that I looked into called Blast of Tempest that really does draw in thematically some of those Tempest themes from Shakespeare, and they're available on YouTube.
Yes.
And Blast of Tempest, you've studied that more completely than I have, and of course your ability to detect the nuances in the Japanese language. I saw one YouTube video where there was English subtitles, but I doubt they really capture it.
Yes.
But it's fascinating in its own right. Did you find that to be a good example of anime, just anime, not Shakespeare, but?
That started as a manga, and when I started reading, I thought this is interesting because it uses Hamlet at the beginning. And Hamlet was the main theme of the Blast of Tempest, but the concept of revenge is something that doesn't fit well with current society anywhere in the world. And that's why I think Tempest was incorporated into it, because when it comes to Hamlet, when everything is over, everyone's dead. But, and also, even though the revenge is complete, everyone's dead. But when it comes to Tempest, you can have your revenge, but you don't have any carnages.
Yes, there are no corpses
Yes.
on the stage.
Yes.
Although it comes very close at some points.
Yes.
There again is another thing that's very interesting to me, pulling in Shakespeare, number one, adapting Shakespeare for your needs as an anime or manga artist, right? Not necessarily to impress people who are in the know, to show you that you can make literary references to great classical poets or to Shakespeare or to Keats, but there because of the material is rich and it fits with what your goals as in the narrative and in the manga. And for anybody who doesn't know this, manga artists are celebrated not only in Japan, across the world now as being artists. And I'm kind of hoping that they don't go the way that Shakespeare went into someday becoming iconic and taught in universities. And I do like the idea of them being taught and remembered and culturally preserved. They strike to the heart of of your life as a Japanese national. To my students, they all grew up with this, I would say almost a mythology, depending on which manga was part of the culture at the time they were coming up. It's essential to formative development and it's your pathway to your imagination, to building your imagination, which is what we want as teachers. That's what we want to inspire as teachers. And they might be in many cases doing a better job of it as a group than we are able to do in our institutional settings. Let's think of some other examples here. And you sent some to me, and I'm trying to remember. There's a Romeo and Juliet kind of adaptation that's fairly recent in.
Yeah, I think it's this one. Yeah, I think it's this one.
Yeah, look at that. Okay, and there's a Shakespeare right there.
Yes,
Romeo and Juliet.
Says, yes.
And so, is it graphic? Does it have pictures?
This is a novelized version, but it do have where did it go? Pictures like this. This is the balcony scene.
Look at that! Look at that! That's just wonderful. That's just wonderful. And you've read that, and do you think that it does a good job with the Romeo and Juliet story?
Yes, it does have a bit of a plot change, but should I say, Romeo and Juliet's plot is known to quite a few Japanese, but they don't know the details. So to fill in those details, I think it's great. And also, some people feel sad that from the modern notion, being able to marry someone that you like is not a choice, but it's their own right. But as you know, Romeo and Juliet is a tragedy. They couldn't do it, so they end up taking their lives. But this version has an epilogue that says that they saw a couple that looks very much like Romeo and Juliet, not in Verona, but in Genoa. And they say that their body is gone somehow. So it gives that notion that there is some hope.
And also room for a sequel.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
So they suddenly show up in Padua or some other place.
Yes.
And, that's just wonderful. And of course, the publisher, the writer, everyone felt the freedom to use this story and to do that.
Yes.
And not fall under the gaze of judgmental film critics or academics or people who say that's not Shakespeare. That's just wonderful stuff. Now, what do you think you will be doing in terms of research? And like I said before, you and I and Reina Endo, my student, are working on an article that I've been completely delinquent on doing. I'm the weak link to the chain right now, because we have been slaughtered this year with work, as we were saying before. And I just can't get my head straight. But after we get through this grading, it's going to be open. And I promise this time, you probably think the Dabs, you just can't trust him. You know, he keeps setting up these deadlines. I'm setting up deadlines and then missing my own deadlines. But anyhow, we're talking about Asobi Gokuro in this article, which for our listeners is a very specific and kind of hard to articulate sense of playfulness that is unique in Japanese culture, but it's playfulness. And so all cultures have playfulness, but what I'm working on now in this paper is trying to, in English, describe it to an international audience where they understand the distinction in Japanese. And I think you would have many different opinions on this, but I was given the example that if you have a nice new car and you want to hang something like a little doll from the rear view mirror, that's a sense of asobi gokuro. It's just something that's just happy to see. And so at one point I'm going to try to explain it, but I have seen the term used for gaming culture, which is another thing in Japan, which is, and these digital researchers have talked about asobi gokuro actually justifying the violence of some of these games. And they mentioned one, I don't want to get too far away from Shakespeare, but one particular game that has been actually sanctioned more by the well-meaning liberal community in Canada, I believe, because it's just too violent. It has a young man is wrongfully accused of murder, I think, and has to go to prison. And your job is to sort of get him out of prison. And when you make mistakes and he makes wrong moves, he's sexually assaulted, he's beaten, he's every bad thing in the world happens to him. And these guys argued that because of the extent of the violence, that there is it's like a Quentin Tarantino movie in a sense, where it's so bad that you begin laughing. Right. So in Kill Bill, when you chop off someone's arm and the blood just keeps spewing and spewing, there's a sense of playfulness finally, because it's being, I guess you call, campy and going back to slasher movies or what. But they tried to argue that. And I put this beside, I had a few students last year who are gamers, and they're women.
Mhm.
Now, I thought of that as more of a man's thing or a boy's thing, but these were serious women gamers. And I asked them about this, and they go, "No, it's just violent. it's not. It's not that much playfulness. It's just violence." So, are you familiar with the gaming community, or?
I think the male gaming community and female gaming community is very different. Japanese women's gaming community is in a way quite big in one sense, that they have games that is specific to women's interest. Love story game that
Boys
goes
love,
on, or
boys love.
boys love is a genre of novels
Okay.
and animations and mangas. It's like a simulation game that you merge in and you do some adventures with these good-looking guys. Or you have another kind of game that Romeo and Juliet game released for PlayStation Portable. And the player is going to play Juliet, and you will meet Romeo, who is the prince of vampire, and Juliet is a family of vampire slayers. It follows through with the topic or the plot, but also you have to fight your way through, or you have to choose between two options and which option will lead you to a happy ending and those kind of things.
So you sort of begin with the name recognition of Romeo and Juliet, but you don't feel any loyalty to telling the story of Romeo and Juliet, but you bring in this element from the play itself. I mean, there's a lot of violence in that play. Each year, my students, I teach it each year, and each year my students are very surprised to see the level of violence. Sort of outdoing, even love is violent. Even, of course, you know, Romeo says there's nothing more violent than being in love and unrequited, and it hurts and all of this. So maybe you could argue that some of that theme plays into the to that particular game. Well, please send that to me, the reference to me, because I could integrate that into what we're doing.
I think it's in the genre of the training game that you grow a character or develop a character through fighting or through any kind of material that's given to you, so that you're given a character that says it's he or she is from level 1, and you put that character through a training, and then he or she is going to be in like level 99 or complete. Those kind of games are quite popular, both in male game genres and female game genres.
I did play some video games when I was younger, but they were not nearly as advanced as they are now. And I would probably look back into it, but I'm afraid I'll become addicted, because the last time I got into a game, I found myself spending a lot of hours that right now I just don't have. You know, maybe after I retire or something, I can get into. But
yes, it's very addictive.
Yeah, but
extremely addictive, and it is taking away my time right now.
No, you're not. You're doing research on popular culture when you're playing those games, and you never know. Igarashi Sensei at Toyo University pointed out that the references in Anpanman to Hamlet or Hamletto and other things, and we need to make sure not to forget that too, because that's early childhood education, and of course not violent at all. Breadman is a hero with the Anpan, it's kind of a soy substance. But anyhow, what else do you think you might be interested in researching in the coming months and year or whatnot? Are you currently working on any project that other than what we're working on, or looking into anything?
I'm still working on with the animation Blast of Tempest and the animation PsychoPass, but Also, there is a new animation that's going to come up, I think, hopefully this year. It's called The Funeral of the Rose King. It's mainly about Richard III. That's been turned into a comic for quite a while, and it's going to be turned into an animation soon. The interesting thing about it is that the main character, Richard, is not a man. He is, I think this is the right term, androgynous. And being that character, he is excluded from the family and so on. And instead of having that very ugly, deformed Richard, you have this very beautiful Richard.
Who's in a, I'm not sure what to say. He's in a trans state where you're not quite sure of gender. You can't identify, there's no gender identification. What a fascinating idea. What a fascinating idea.
And the writer is very popular, a manga artist. So I think it's in its 13th or 14th book. So it's been running for a very long time.
As a manga, but they are going to move it into anime, or
yes.
And that has not quite yet begun.
Yes.
So when it does begin, then you will be at the front of the line to write a little article about what's going on there with the anime.
Yes.
Yeah, very, very good. I want to return to PsychoPass for just a second. I'd forgotten that when we were talking about it before. I hadn't forgotten it. I just had forgotten whether it was path or pass, but it's PsychoPass.
It's PsychoPass. Yes.
Yes. And but there's a play on the word there.
Yes.
Psychopath, PsychoPass.
Yes.
Okay. Which is another very, of course it happens in any language, but it's a very distinctly Japanese thing too. The word plays, you know, the double meanings that you get out of words, and compound words that this is Shakespearean, really.
And actually, in Japanese, what we know as a psychopath is, in Japanese, it's PsychoPass. And the title of the animation is PsychoPath. So it already has that double meaning. Built
in. Would that be done in katakana, or do they use the Roman letters?
It's using the Roman letters, but the pronunciation is completely Japanese.
Yeah.
So people will assume that psychopath is that the anti-social thing, but also the title of the play itself or the animation itself do deal with those kind of things.
And again, of course, with the name, you're expecting to have some exciting violence and
yes, bloodshed.
bloodshed. And even though it's maybe animated or whatnot, it's still bloodshed. I mean, you get involved with these characters and so forth. So yeah, I don't know if that's completely playful or not, but we'll see. There does seem, and I don't know if it's more so in Japanese society, you know, years ago when I was much younger, and we were told that we were going to learn from movies and television. All of the young people were going to become super violent, going to these movies and seeing. And you know, I was thinking at the time, listen, I'm in high school. We just finished King Lear, and I know enough about Macbeth to tell you that no Clint Eastwood movie that I just saw is any more violent than those plays. If anything's going to make us violent, because now they are, well, even in Clint Eastwood, but violence is punished in the end. I mean, good wins over evil to a degree. Lear, it seems like just everybody loses, but and then of course, when games came along and video games and that sort of stuff, that was supposed to destroy a whole generation, particularly young men, turning them into, you know, violent, aggressive males who didn't know right from wrong. And it didn't seem to do that. And all of my students all of whom read manga, many of those manga get increasingly more violent as you get older. It seems to be totally separated, that they are inured. It's not like they would see someone hurt on the street and not respond as normal and caring human beings, but that there is a sense of a distance that you may know about better than I do. There is a sense of distance and maybe a kind of where it doesn't penetrate your soul, it doesn't mess up your mind. It's just interesting. And so I don't know how to describe that in any language.
Like being the target of violence is not something they want, but see it as an entertainment. And then in the end, when that evil is punished, they feel that whatever that action they're doing is right, is going to be given back as something that's correct. I think that's, and also I think it works as some kind of morale tale in some cases.
So the endings,
as you know, the very popular manga and the film and the animation, the Kimetsu no Yaiba, it has broke the record of the Japanese movie sales. I actually haven't read the manga or saw the animation because I know it's going to be very addictive. So I just left it out. But I hear stories from friends and articles that manga changed the notion of being good is good. Being good is okay. It's not nerd. It's not uncool. But being good or being honest, or I think it's the word is like in Japanese, it's yoiko, iko, is good. That changed because until then, being a furyo was cool. Being violent was cool. But although the Kimetsu no Yaiba is violent, it is I don't know whether this is the correct term, a reasonable violence or a violence in defense or those kind of things.
Yeah. And I'm going to stretch it a little bit, but I'm thinking that particularly with my Japanese students, and I think a lot of people who grow up with education parents and reasonable, in very stable households and have a relatively normal childhood, you might be able to argue that having some exposure to the darker side of human nature is good. Otherwise, you don't know who you are, that, oh, I'm one of the good people because now I've seen the bad people. And, because you didn't grow up in a war-torn country or on a street where there's a lot of, people are shooting each other, or out in the country where people may be hurting each other and being very violent, depending on where you live or where you are, that you need it as part of your emotional wholeness, to develop some kind of wholeness to understand who you are.
And also those kind of violent materials is, as you can say, the introduction into what other people go through. And it also stretches the people's or the reader's imagination. I think that's one part of those kind of violent movies will do.
Yeah, well, we could go on and on about this. the moral, I do think that probably it's done very well in Japan because early childhood and children are very protected from this sort of thing until a certain age. Yes. And then, it's allowed to come in. And this is managed by the commercial publishers and video makers. And there's a sense of protectiveness to a degree, and then open it up, you see. But I tease my students. I said, when we start Romeo and Juliet, I said, how many street fights have you guys seen in your life, the streets of Shibuya? And as reckless and rowdy as things get in Shibuya on Halloween, I've never seen a riot. or a street fight or anything like you have in the play, and they laugh about that. So they do. If you know, it's fascinating that there were cultures where people could just, one guy could make a gesture at another guy, and the next thing you know, it's just a major. It's not over a political issue. It's not over anything. What the prince says is just air. It's just air, airy word. Well, what I want you to do is stay a couple of minutes after we finish, which will be, we're heading to that now. But I wanted to tell you how much, again, I appreciate you coming in. I know that you've been very, very busy, and I know you must be very tired. That's a translation of an often used Japanese word. But otsukare-sama, you gambarimashita, Mina. Uh, we uh, we are going to enjoy a little bit of a slowdown in the pace here, and we really need to take advantage of it. And so here I came in and intervened on your what's coming up is a small break. But you were gracious enough to come and join us today, Kyoko, and thank you again so very much.
Yeah, thanks from my side, because being able to speak about my research and those kind of fields, it just what should I say, turns the clock, or makes the things about what I have to think or what I need to do, or I have the imagination, or I have to start thinking about something else, and just adjust those kind of things. I think that's also important.
Yeah.
Thank you again.
You're welcome. It's no reason to go into this business if we don't have a chance to do the things that we love. And I think that today we got a chance to talk a little bit about the things. And this is something we don't get to do so often, particularly in a pandemic. We get caught into the administration and teaching and so forth. And okay, well, my best to you and yours over our academic break from teaching, and I hope to see you soon in person.
Yes, me too.
Yeah. Bye bye.